Hey, what is up guys, this is Alex, and today I want to talk about orchestral articulations, explaining you what they are, what their names are, what do they sound like, and how you can use them to make your tracks, your orchestral tracks, sound more pro. Now, for this tutorial we're going to use this 30-second Zelda sketch I wrote on the live stream footage the other day. So, if you haven't heard the track or haven't checked out the live stream, I'm going to play it now, and then we're going to talk about orchestral articulations. I think this is going to kill my CPU though, because it's quite a complex track. So yeah, playing it, 3, 2, 1. So yeah, that was the track. And so let's talk about orchestral articulations. Articulations are one of the reasons why some tracks sound so full of life and others don't. And when we are beginners, we tend to not use them because we often do not even know what they are. So it's not it's not very complicated as a subject. It's quite simplistic, and there are many types of articulations, but you can split them in 3 main categories, which makes everything easier. So you have the long category, which is like sustained articulations and stuff like that. Then you have the short category, which is like staccato, marcato, etc. And then you have what I call the aleatoric, but that's probably not the right term. This is like the transition articulation, so stuff like tremolo, crescendo, flutter tongue, etc. So we're gonna hear what they sound like for all of these articulations, and then I'm gonna give you a few tips to use them and implement them into your own tracks, as I did in this example. Like the reason why this track sounds so full and lively, other than being the arrangement, etc., it's also because I used long, short, and transitory articulations. Let's call them transitory instead of aleatoric, because I think aleatoric is not the right term. So yeah, I use those 3, and same thing happens in my Apocalypsis Noctis arrangement, or the landing, etc. Like my tracks, which sound amazing and full, etc. It's usually tracks that use multiple articulations. So as I said, I split them in 3 categories. So the first category is a sustained one, which is the most basic. And yeah, there's also percussion articulation, but first let's check out the articulation for the strings and brass and choir and stuff. So sustained sounds pretty much like this. Like that part we heard there. Sustained is long sustained notes, and it's the normal way to play a string instrument, And when you play in sustained articulations, you can convey melodies and harmonies very correctly, very efficiently rather, not correctly. There are many correct ways of delivering melodies and stuff. But yeah, you can do deliver harmonies and melodies very efficiently, because you also have you can tweak the modulation wheel, and it affects sustained patches a lot, because you have rises and falls in intensity, like in this part here. This sounds amazing on a sustained articulation. And so sustained articulation are, sustained notes. And then you can, generally, if you have a professional library, like, I don't know, Cinematic Strings 2 or Metropolis Arc 1, or string libraries, you generally have a legato function, which allows you to play legato notes. So a legato note is pretty much when, you're playing a string instrument, and instead of, when you're changing the note, instead of leaving the string with your finger and then moving the finger and putting your finger on the string again, you slide the string down to the note that you want to reach. So you have sort of a sliding sound. But I guess I do not have a good example of legato in this track. Maybe I do, maybe in this part. But I cannot show you because I do not have a keyboard here, so Let's check out if this is legato. I don't remember, honestly. Yeah, that was legato. Like, you heard the note was sliding. It's not, you know, the note is not, you hear the attack times are connected. It's not as if you play a non-legato articulations. But you should try it for yourself to understand the difference on your own software. But generally speaking, when you hear fake strings, like if you hear sustained strings that sound fake, sometimes it's because they have no legato. So sustained legato is that type of sliding sustain. Now you cannot use sustained legato if you want to, you know, write chords. So for example, in this ensemble, I did not use legato. This is sustained without legato, because if I used legato, it would have been impossible to play 3 notes at the same time. Now then we have, Marcato, which is sort of a hybrid between short and long articulations. So Marcatos are, for example, notes like the ones in the violas in the beginning of the song. They are kind of long sustained notes, but they are not like the sustains because they have much more intensity. Now, the main thinking behind articulation is like there are 2 ways in which, like, not 2 ways, but the way in which you play an instrument, the intensity with which you play an instrument determines how long you can play it. So sustained notes tend to be not that much intense because they need, like, the players need to conserve their stamina to be able to play long notes. Instead, marcato notes and staccato notes can be played much more intensely, much more powerfully, because they are generally not long notes. They are short notes. They are short but intense bursts, while sustained notes are calm but long bursts. So marcato is pretty much the average of those 2. They are kind of intense notes, and kind of not too short but not too long either, you know. You can, like, if I were to prolong this to infinity, it would fade out naturally after a while. This would not happen with a sustained note, but it does with marcato notes, because again, marcatos are halfway. Now, in Metropolis Arc, which is the library I used for these violas, you have, oh sorry, this is portato actually, not marcato, but it's pretty much sort of the same thing. For strings, you call it portato sometimes. And there's portato long or portato short. Portato short is much more intense, but as the name suggests, it's short. You also have sustain and marcato in brass and choir as well, and the concept is always the same. So, for example, when you want to have sustained notes but powerful, like I did here, you might want to use marcato. I also use marcato in my track at the landing in the second part when the choir goes da ba ba ba. If you checked out the track, and you know what I'm talking about, those are not sustained notes, those are marcato notes. And that's why the choir in that part is so powerful, and you feel it because it's marcato. It's much more powerful than a sustained note. Then we have the shorter notes, the staccatos. So for example, these ones. Or this. Oops. So as I mentioned in my short string or staccato strings tutorial, the staccato strings are pretty amazing because you can do cool things with their velocities to create interesting rhythms, as I did here. So if you listen to the whole, to all the staccato notes, you're gonna hear that they are pretty much, they have a sort of bouncing rhythm to them. Yeah, this part is kind of messy because this track was written quite fast, but yeah, you get the idea. So with the staccato notes, you can create this interesting rhythm. You have much more energy than you have in your sustained notes, and yeah, the thing is, you can also use mod wheel in this case, but I mean, it depends on the library. But generally speaking, when you want to manage the intensity of a sustained note, you use mod wheel. When you want to manage the intensity of a staccato note or marcato note, you use the velocity. And yeah, and you can create stuff like that with the staccatos. Then we have what they call the transitory or aleatoric articulations, which are tremolos, pretty much like I think in the end here maybe there's a tremolo. So here we have, but it's not that much audible. I have to isolate it. So the tremolo is something like this. Like it's a sustained note, but it changes the pitch consistently a little bit and gives that vibrating, you know, type of sound, which creates a degree of tension. This is useful if you want to create a more effective transition, because, you know, putting tension in your track either with risers or reverse sounds or, you know, transitory articulations is amazing. Because, yeah, you make the listen, when you have something like this going on, you make the listener crave for that, you know, release from the tension that you're building. So I use tremolo this way to build tension a little bit in the passages of the track. So I think I did it in here as well. Yeah, if we remove the staccato notes, you're going to hear there's a tremolo beneath them, along with some sustained notes. Like it rises, and I also use the mod wheel to make it rise in intensity. But yeah, those ringing quality to the pitch helps into increasing the tension, and people go, oh, something is happening. So tremolos are useful for that, but you can also use them for other stuff, you know. Articulations are, it's not like you can only use sustain for something and staccato for something. Like you can use them however you want, but a cool thing to do is to understand their qualities and, you know, capitalizing on them. Then, so we talk about sustain, staccato, marcato, and tremolo. For the brass instead, you pretty much have the same articulations, but you also have what are called flutter tongues, which are something like this. So one articulation I didn't mention is crescendo, and crescendo is pretty much like a sustained note that grows in terms of tension on its own. It's pretty much like taking, I think, sustained notes and, you know, editing the mod wheel to go up. So this is what a crescendo sounds like. Like this is what a crescendo short, and then you have crescendo long. So yeah, it goes up in intensity. But then in the brass, you also have crescendo flutter tongue, which is this. It has quite of, you know, a little bit of vibration into it, but you hear it more clearly when you use flutter tongue on higher brass. For example, on trumpets, this is what the flutter tongue sounds on trumpet. Like you heard that change in pitch. It's quite pretty much like tremolo, but for brass. So I use that here. It's quite subtle though, but it does increase that intensity. So you want to be like, even if you use articulations in a subtle way, you still deliver lots of value to your track, because especially when you do it often and when you do it like in an alternating way. So if you have the same instrument but you alternate between different articulations while it plays, it makes it sound much more alive. And this is one thing that beginners tend to not do. They take one patch, one articulation, they just use it. Generally speaking, it's just either sustained or staccato, and they leave it like that for the rest of the track. So they have a string going on for 2 minutes playing 2 minutes of staccato, and that's not realistic at all. It's not an orchestra of robots that you're writing for. You can use all articulations to make your track more rich. And yeah, one articulation I forgot to mention with the strings is called Colegno, I think. But where is it? Wait a second. So Colegno is an articulation I already talked about in this channel, actually, which is sort of like it's sort of like oh sorry, here it's called Bartok Pizzicato. So it's sort of like staccato notes, but you have this type of sound. Like it's not like it is a staccato note or spiccato note, sorry, but you have that sort of high sound. Wait, where did it go? That sharp sound, that's pretty much, I think, the wood part of the bow slamming on top of the string, and that's what produces that kind of wood or sharp wood sound. And you can use it to create high end in your tracks. I used it in the landing to create something similar to a clap, yeah, you can be creative with it and to create new sonorities. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that for the most part of this tutorial I said staccato, but I actually meant spiccato. Spiccato is short, like the short articulation you heard so far. Staccato is similar, but it's much less aggressive type of sound, but it's pretty much similar. And yeah, so those were the articulation for the orchestra, the main articulation. I'm sure there are multiple. There's one that I didn't mention about the brass, which is called the scoop. For example, the scoop or the rip, which is pretty much this. This is called rip. Then you have clusters like rips and clusters are amazing ways again to create those transitions. Or rips are also amazing to create, give importance to some parts of the rhythm or accents if you want. And I do that in my tracks. I think in Codename High Wind and also in Apocalyptic Noctis. You're gonna hear sometimes that the brass goes and it gives a nice effect. Then we have the percussion articulations, which are pretty much straightforward. There are basically two ways of playing general percussive instruments, like timpani and stuff, or a percussive ensemble like this one. So you have the normal hit, like just hitting the percussion, and then you have rolls. Rolls are pretty much what I do in the cymbals. So you see in the cymbals we have both rolls and normal notes. This is what a normal note sounds like. For the cymbal, this is just a strike, and the roll is this instead. This rising thing, it's pretty much like the percussion guy playing very fast notes and going higher and higher in intensity. That's a roll, and it helps into creating this rising sort of percussive sound, which helps you into bringing the tension from one part to the other, or creating anticipation in the percussive part of the track. So this is what strikes and rolls sound like when they're put together. So I used the roll here at the end of this, how to call it? at the end of this part, to bring the tension to the next repetition. If I were to remove that roll, I would have lost a little bit of tension. So rolls are useful to convey and to preserve the tension, or to create anticipation. So now that you know a bit of how articulations work and what they are, how you can use them, you can start to appreciate how they can bring life to your track. Because this is something people tend to overlook when they begin making music. They take one single patch for one instrument and, with one single articulation, and they use the same articulation for the whole track in that instrument. And generally speaking, that's not a very popular way to write orchestral music, because when you write orchestral music, you have to consider that you're writing for a very vast quantity of human beings. Like the orchestra is like 40 or 60 players and stuff, and they can do a lot of stuff. So people tend to use them at their maximum to create that rich orchestral sound. And tend to use them at their maximum, I mean they tend to make them play multiple articulation and also tweak, like interchange them, like I did, for example, here. Like in this track, I did not do that way too much, but in some parts I did. For example, for the basses here. So it changes from sustained notes to short spiccato notes, and the reason why is that the short spiccato notes bring more power to those, like to that these short spiccato fills. They bring more energy and power to the whole thing. But if I used sustained notes throughout, they would have brought less energy because, as I said, sustained notes are less intense, and also the rhythm is a bit off because sustained notes have a much longer attack time. So that's why I changed to spiccato notes for these runs here, or fills, whatever you want to call them. And I also did that, for example, in the French horn, I think, here. To create this type of fanfare or something. If I were to use sustained notes, this is what it would sound like. I mean, it's not the same thing, it's just so bland, and that's because sustain cannot deliver the same amount of intensity, power, energy in such short bursts like staccatos and spiccatos do. Staccatos in the case of brass. So yeah, it's a good practice to interchange between them. Or another thing I did, for example, in the trumpets, is I have this staccato pattern, but it ends in this crescendo flutter tongue. The volumes are not that much balanced, but yeah, this is because this is just a sketch. But you get the idea. You can play with articulations like this and create very interesting patterns. And the easiest way to do this, as you see here, when I change the color of my note, it changes the articulation. That's because of two reasons. The first is that I'm using what you would call what are they called again? Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, multis. And they're pretty much like patches with multiple articulations, not just one articulations. This is a trumpet multi-patch. So you see here we have a menu with different articulations and we can key switch them. So key switch means there's a key in this Kontakt keyboard. This range of red keyboards, when you play it, you press them. Actually, let's go on the trumpets. When you press these red keyboards called key switches, they switch something inside the library. In this case, they switch the articulation. So one way to switch articulation is to go in your sequencing or piano roll unit and go on the key switches and trigger the key switches when you want to trigger an articulation change. But the difficult thing about this is that you have to know what key switch note corresponds to what. And it's kind of, difficult sometimes to remember, so you have to go back and open the library and check it out, and it's such a long and tedious process. So a very nice guy called Blake Robinson, he created this plugin for FL Studio called BRSO Articulate, which is a very advanced sort of MIDI out, which allows you to create this it allows you to link the color of the notes in FL Studio to an articulation, or to a key switch actually. So you the way you use it, I suggest to go on the website. There is a tutorial for that, so you can check it out. Very interesting, goes very in depth, and explains to you everything you need to know. But yeah, what you do is you go on the main page here, and you have all these colors here, and to every color you can assign a key switch. So when you use that color here, it pretty much presses that key switch automatically and activates that key switch automatically for the note of that color. So in here, what I did is I set up all the key switches. So you see here the notes A6, F6, etc. They all correspond to a key switch in Kontakt, in this Kontakt patch. and in such a way, when I change the color of these notes, it's going to, thanks to the algorithm of BRSO Articulate, it's going to play those notes in those key switches. I do not know if there's such plugins in other DAWs, and I do not know if this plugin works in Cubase, Logic, etc. But I suggest to go check out the plugin website. Just Google BRSO Articulate on Google, and you're gonna find the website. Also, Blake Robinson's channel is full of very interesting live stream where he composes from scratch. So if you're interested in that stuff, you might want to check that channel out as well. And that's it for articulations, I think. Like I said, pretty much everything I need to say. But yeah, one tip I want to give you is listen very critically to other people's orchestral music. Like listen to film scores, etc. with very critical ear, because in there they use articulations like crazy. For example, this track I wrote like the other day in the live stream. This doesn't use a lot of articulations. Like it does a little bit, way much more than my usual tracks or the usual beginner tracks. But if you hear film scores, that's where it's at. That's where those guys that's where you hear the most amazing use of articulations. And before I wrote this, I spent like a week, the week before this, I listened to the How to Train Your Dragon soundtrack for hours on end, and that's where I really noticed, like, fuck, articulations are so cool. Maybe I could use them to bring more energy and happiness into my tracks, etc. And that's, I think, why this track sounds so interesting. So yeah, definitely make use of them to create those interesting changes of energy and create those grace notes, those fills and runs, and to make sure that your instrumentation does not sound bland or robotic. And make sure that you use libraries that allow you to do this, because some libraries either do not have multi type of patches, or they just do not have enough articulations. If you do have those libraries, I suggest you to either, what I did before, instead of using multis, I opened different patches for different articulations. So I would have bass, sustain, bass, tremolo, bass, spiccato and stuff. Either do that, or upgrade to a library which allows you to use multiple articulations and switch between them, and get BRSO Articulate, because it's a very useful plugin. So that will be it for this tutorial, and as always, if you're new here, you might want to subscribe. If you've been following me, consider, if you're earning value out of this channel, consider going over Patreon, and in there, you can help me into making this whole YouTube thing financially sustainable, so I can deliver more value to you guys. And you can also get nice rewards like stems to my songs and MIDI files. I'm also working on redoing my Patreon page right now, actually. That's why I do not have much time this week to make tutorials. So yeah, I'll talk more about that in the future. Like, I'm gonna make a video because I'm expanding that page so you guys can earn even more value out of it. And that's it, I guess, for this tutorial. I hope it did help you and it spread some light, or shined some. Fuck, I cannot speak English anymore. But yeah, I hope this helped you. That's it for today. Alex out.